Okay, folks, we're going to do some trig derivatives today. So we're going to do a bunch of new rules in this lesson. There are 6 of them we're going to add today. And we are also going to really focus in on chain rule. So a better heading for this lesson would be trig derivatives with the chain rule. Okay, so what you will need is your derivatives reference for this. And we are looking at numbers 5 through 10 essentially. So every trig ratio has a derivative. These all come from somebody smart using that limit definition that we started at the beginning of the year and trig identities and playing with them algebraically until they get something that makes sense. So some of them are easier. Sine x, the derivative is cosine x, and then they go down to like cosecant of x, the derivative is negative cosecant x, cotangent x. Okay, so some are easier to remember than others, but applying them is not that hard. Okay, by the way, if you have access to a printer, I haven't suggested this at all this year because like only boomers have printers, right? But if you do have access to a printer, this would be a great thing to print off as a reference. If not, it might even be worth your time to like copy it down on a page in your notebook to reference as well. Okay, so trig derivatives with chain rule. So as we go, I will give you the rules that I'm using off this sheet. In this case, cosecant of x, the derivative of that is negative cosecant cotangent. Negative cosecant x cotangent x. Okay. So in this case, f prime of x is negative cosecant 3x cotangent 3x. It's best to write those in parentheses. And then if you're thinking this, you're close, but you need to do chain rule. So notice 3x is a function inside there. So negative 3 goes in front because that's the derivative of the inside. Okay. So that's what we're dealing with here. It's not just applying the rules, but also using chain rule as we go. Notice, however, this next one, not so hard. So f prime of x, because this negative 2 is outside, it doesn't change how this function changes that much. It just kind of stretches it out. So that we can bring down. And then the derivative of tangent x is secant squared x. Okay. So all this one is to it really is negative 2 I bring down, and then secant squared x is my derivative here. Okay. So make sure you can tell before we move on. Make sure you could explain why I use chain rule in the first one, but not the second one. If you can't, so pause the video, think about it. If you can't explain that, go back and rewatch. Okay, then we'll tackle this next one, and here I'm going to use chain rule again, right? So I have really, this is like some function to the third, and then the inside is secant. So I need to know the derivative of secant x, and that derivative is secant x tangent x. Okay, and then, so the derivative of just u to the third would be 3u squared by power rule, right? So in this case, our derivative, y prime, would be 3 secant squared x times the derivative of secant. So secant is the inside function in this case. So secant x tangent x. Okay. And notice we can do a little bit of simplifying here. So secant squared times secant, well, that's secant to the third power. That's it. And we should call that dy dx, because that's what it tells us to call it, right? Okay. So there are a few examples. We're going to move on to some slightly harder ones here. Really, we're just using our trig rules and the chain rule All right, so this one, the derivative of sine is cosine. That one's a really easy one to remember. Okay. And then what I can do, right, is I can rewrite y as 3 sine to the 1/2 power x, because that's the same as the square root, right? And then I use power rule. So then 1/2 times 3 is 3/2. Oops, 3/2, right? Sine, I subtract 1 to the negative 1/2 x times the derivative of sine, because sine is the inside function. So we're doing chain rule here, so times cosine x. And then last one. So f prime of x, the derivative of cosine is negative sine. So you will at some point in your calculus career forget that negative and get a problem wrong. That's okay. You'll probably see me do it in a video at some point too. So f prime of x is cosine x, or sorry, sine, negative sine, see I just did it, negative sine square root x times the derivative of square root x. So you can think power rule, that's really x to the 1/2, right? So times 1/2 x to the negative 1/2. Okay. So as always, take a look at these last two on the screen. Make sure you can explain how I got these results, and then when you can do that, you're probably ready for the Delta Math practice.